Yes, so I will speak about what future without nature, and clearly how natural history could help. Humanity today is facing big challenges. I will summarize to three of those challenges. The first one is the most well-known. It's an environmental challenge. Earth is experiencing big problems, as you can see, whatever there are over exploitation of resources, here marine resources, land use, global warming, or pollution. I have an infinite time, maybe it's always on 20. It's very comfortable. So environmental challenges, from that we have two possible attitudes. Either we change, and this is a prerequisite for economic prosperity and peace, or we continue business as usual with a very high risk of environmental but also social disequilibriums. This is all well known. Doesn't work anymore. This environmental challenge is not just a matter of natural history specialists. This time is over. And you know this picture, it's coming from France. It's also a question of social and economic acceptability of what we are doing. It's not only a matter of natural history. This means that the question is complex, and so will be the solutions too. And we desperately need a large input of social sciences in the equation to solve this equation. We are also facing a cultural challenge. If I say that the Tosca has been composed by Richard Wagner, this is shocking. If I tell you that this is a crustaceans, where is the problem? It's not a problem. An oyster, after all, is seafood. And so you see there is kind of unbalance between some aspect of a culture and natural history culture. And this means that we have to explain natural history to the public, we have to explain complexity to a large public, we have to make biodiversity a familiar cultural object. It was. Here on this picture you have a picture drawn 30,000 years ago in the Grotte Chauvet in South France. And we have to consider natural history as a common cultural good, which is not the case today. Cultural challenge, this means that also we have to fight against alternative facts and relativism. We are facing fake news transmitted by social networks, and there is no equivalence of claims between those fake news related to social networks and the rationality of science. All citizens are equal in rights on this planet. And they are also equal in freedom, but they have no equivalence of competencies. I have not a plane pilot, and I will not recommend you to be in a plane if I am the pilot of a plane, even if I have the equality of right with the pilot, a real one. That's the message. And we have also to challenge obscurantism in general. This means that we have to promote the scientific way of thinking. The third challenge is a kind of ethical challenge, how to inhabit the Earth, how to do it in a sustainable way. I found that on the internet, and it's a game for children to inhabit the Earth. And this makes me a bit anxious, because it's much more than a children's game. People today just don't know exactly how to inhabit the Earth. And this question is an ethical question. What are my rights? What can I do on Earth? I will just give you very synthetic, schematic, almost caricatural example. This is the question of limits behind this ethical challenge. Private property and way of life. It's not because I have the money to buy a very large house for two people that I can do it in terms of ethic. It's not because I have money to pay a lot of gas for a huge car, it's kind of huge, stupid cars, but I can do it. This means, does economic power justify every use that we can do of the planet? This is the question of consumerism, this question of limits. How many suits can I have in my home? And this is the question of superfluous things, here illustrated by a kind of giant McDo things. And this question of limit is also a question of economy, how to share public goods. Here a picture related to the use of water in the desert. This is also a question of demography. We have to ask the question of demography. How many humans on the planet? How many human beings can live together in the planet in a sustainable way? So for all those three challenges, environmental, cultural, ethical challenge, great museums can help, but they cannot do that alone. So what are we doing in Paris? My motto for the museum in Paris is fascinate to educate, because I think that natural history is just fascinating, natural history objects are just beautiful, and we need to fascinate people, but we also need to educate them, to make instruction a priority for museum, that they know better what is the planet, what is biodiversity on Earth, and so on. The classical tools in Paris are the galleries of the museum, the gardens, we have a lot of botanic gardens, and the free zoos of the museum. Here in the galleries, for example, it was a picture from the 19th century that presented kind of organized picture of life with an accumulation of specimens to show the wonders of nature. And at this time, the museum displayed a lot of specimens. Today, we have exhibits dealing with biodiversity, and we try to involve the best as we can young for the future, because young people are central in this proposal. Emotion is also a very important tool. Here in the Paris Zoo, we have emotion when we are facing reality, whatever it's in a zoo or in a gallery of a museum. And if you have emotion, you will memorize better the message, the scientific message that is behind the object that you are looking at. So it's important to develop the emotion of the people. It's not just for fun, it's also to bear the message that we have to bear. We have spectacular sceneries, here the Great Gallery of Evolution in Paris. This is necessary, but this is clearly not enough today, and I joined Johannes for this message. We have to do something else. So the other tools, to be more committed in the society in general, because that's the aim, to be committed in the society. I will pick up just two of them. The first one is citizen science, and the second one is how to be invested and committed in the social debates in general. Citizen science. Paris Museum is very involved in this. Citizen science is a pedagogical tool. It brings citizens to natural history in order to survey and understand biodiversity and to make progresses in knowledge by sharing the science. Here you have different actions underneath with Viginature, Herbonautes, and so on. And we use citizen science for very different topics, from looking at meteorites fall to birds and so on. And at Paris Museum, we have about 30 years of experience of citizen science with different topics, as I told. It's kind of hobby for amateurs, but we citizens can learn to do that. We have programs about bats, butterflies, flora, birds, and so on, including meteorites, as I said. And I will just present you one result from citizen science. This is the scientific slide in my talk. We have we use citizen science to compute the northward drift in Europe on the last 20 years. In terms of temperature, it's an average increase of about 1 Celsius degree, which represents 2 250 kilometers about. If you look at butterflies, they move northward up to a bit more than 100 kilometers. And if you look at birds, they only move of a bit less than 40 kilometers. This means that butterflies are flying much faster than birds, of course. Of course, it's from generation to generation, because birds are turning around the same place when butterflies are moving northward more efficiently. This is recent results published a few years ago by the museum on the base of citizen science results. But we have to enlarge the scope of citizen science. We enlarge it to a scholarship program called Vigie Nature École, so it's in contact with the Ministry of Education in France, so that we can grab young citizens, young children, to citizen science. We have to develop program adapt for all generations. That is to say, once you have a child who is involved in citizen science, we also have to follow up as a teenager, as a young adult, and as an elder people. And we are now focusing also on professional targets. For example, we are focusing on farmers, on gardeners, on specific topics of citizen science. And the second aspect that I would like to develop, the last one, is about how museum can be involved in social debates to strengthen the role of natural history in the society. Here is a picture of a paper that I wrote in the newspaper Le Monde in France, with a great newspaper in France, about natural history to fight against obscurantism. It was about 2 years ago. And it's time to develop the pervasive influence of natural history. Indeed, at different times in the history of our societies, natural history played a very important role. It was the case at the Siècle des Lumières with Buffon and Lavoisier and some others just before the French Revolution. It was the case with Goethe and the natural philosophy in Germany. It was the case in England with Darwin, for example. And at all those different types, natural history helped citizens and societies to think themselves on the planet Earth. That is to say that it was almost a political program behind natural history. And facing the challenges that we have to face today, I deeply think that we need natural history to help us to think that. Social debates are therefore a duty for museum. And among other actions, the museum has decided to publish manifestos, hence the title of my talk. Why manifestos? As I said, natural history has a strong contribution to make to modern concerns. What about environment, health, climate change, synthetic biology, GMO, and so on? Those are very serious questions. And citizens who are also voters need to be instructed on such questions. If you like to try ignorance for such important questions, we can, but it's a bit dangerous. So our museum has to speak and to be heard on such topics. Not to dictate an opinion, it's not our aim, but just to help citizens to nurture their knowledge with scientific facts and to defend science. And behind science, it's a defense of democracy, because we have no democracy without a minimum of knowledge. Ignorance never leads to democracy. So we published a first manifesto du Museum, What Future Without Nature. It was 1.5 years ago, to explain how natural history could help today and to ground humans in nature and guide environmental challenges. In short, this manifesto said that the species Homo sapiens arose about 300,000 years ago. It is one species among million other species, and it's nothing without those other species. We have a lot of bacteria inside our gut, on our skin, and so on, and we know that we need other species for many reasons, for many things. And the human species stand stands within nature, not against nature. And the time of dualism is over. We have not human beings on one side and nature on the other. Human beings are part of nature. And it has to change, this species, Homo sapiens, has to change its way of thinking itself on the planet. Hence the importance of natural science. And for that, we have to break limits. And we have to start to think other kind of scales, particularly space and time scales. And natural history allows to overpass our ordinary limits. How can we think possible future without large time scale? What are the options? And the present day crisis will be solved only if we are able to think large scales of space and time. And this led me to talk about the tragedy of horizons. If I am working in a bank, in finance, my time is a microsecond now, even maybe less. If I am in charge of my family, I look at my family budget for next month, for next year, or for years, for the next vacations time or whatever. And if I am a politician, my horizon is about 5 years. And that's the way people are thinking ever since the origin of societies, almost. But the ecology needs decades, and evolution is over 100,000 years. How we have to learn to think? How to learn to think this kind of scale of time? This is why we publish those manifestos, From Science to Society and Science with Societies. We published the first one at the fall 2017, What Future Without Nature. We published the second one last year. At the end of last year, it was about migrations, including human migrations. So we are just at the edge of politics. And we will publish the next one in 2019, this year, at the end of the year. That the topic will be the relationship between human beings and other species, other animal species. So those manifestos, the aim of those manifestos is to shed the light of science on complex problems and to tackle questions that help to provide guidelines for individual as collective actions. But this also starts at individual levels, not only collective. And we have also to stop at the edge where politics begins, because we are not politicians at the museum. In conclusion, we have to think large spatial and temporal scales. We have to address social issues, which is a necessity. And we need educated citizens able to decide and think collectively the future of the Earth on rational grounds. And for that, natural history is the way to understand, behave, and act. It's a school of thought which enlightens human beings on their place in the world. And from that, I would like to promote an ethic for the planet. We have two possible attitudes. We can be very cynical. After all, the evolution gave me a large brain. With this large brain, I can make buildings, build cars, have microphones, computers, and so on. And it's not my fault. Termites are making a house for termites. I am making many things with my brain. And let's run that. And we will see what happens. But this large brain also leads me to understand what I am doing. From that, I can have a responsible attitude. Looking at what I am doing on Earth, I can say, oh, maybe I can change. And of course, it's the attitude I recommend strongly. And this also means that we have to have a long-term view based on the preservation on the evolutionary potential of life. I mean that we have to preserve biodiversity on Earth, not only for selfish reasons, grounded on our own use of natural resources, but we have to preserve a potential for evolution of life. This means that we have to preserve the evolutionary potential for the future of biodiversity, and in these terms, diversity is the important thing. Thank you very much for your attention.